In this video, we're going to talk about inspiration. So I'm Daniel Norton, photographer here in New York. I make videos like this. This one's going to be about philosophy. I do videos about gear sometimes and technique, business. If there's something you want to see, by the way, make a comment below. But also, if you haven't already, subscribe. Anyways, this occurred to me because I just started rereading The King in Yellow by Robert Chambers. So, and if people know much about horror and stuff, this is a pretty influential book, and with a lot of people, including H.P. Lovecraft, who, of course, most people know who Lovecraft is. He's pretty well known these days. But this book, at least part of it, came in really an interesting way, as far as my understanding, is actually from this guy here, this gentleman, Ambrose Bierce. So Ambrose Bierce wrote a story called, so I can find it, it's called An Inhabitant of Carcosa. And it's a great story. It's actually in the public domain, so go read it. But spoiler, he doesn't talk much about Carcosa. he talks about it, right? But he doesn't. It's mostly about the person, right? And then, of course, Chambers' book famously starts with this poem about Carcosa, right? And then goes into many other things. And what's interesting to me about that is that what you've got is somebody who clearly read that story, right? And then thought, wow, this person created this thing, this moment, and this was over here. What is that, right? And this moment helped make the Chambers go, what's this over here? And from that, and then Lovecraft was like, oh, what's that over there? And they grew. And I think that one thing that's great about inspiration, or the nature of inspiration, is that's how it works a lot of times, right? We oftentimes can look at work, right? And I've talked about this a little bit before about copying versus whatever. This is kind of the difference, right? And where I think is really interesting. Granted, it's about writing, and I primarily talk about photography, but this will be good for when I write my book. But the idea that you can look at something and say, oh yeah, I like where they went with that. Let's say if you're looking at photography, or looking at painting, let's say, or anything visual, movie, where can I take it? Like, what's going on over here? Like, what's this, right? And then that chunk can become yours, right? You can look and say, what is the story that's going on here that was started by, let's say that you look at one of my pictures, just not to say that I should inspire people, but, I inspire you. But you know what I'm saying, whatever. We'll say it's Seth's picture to make it feel better. You look at one of Seth's pictures. So Seth takes a picture of an alien or a zombie, right, or whatever he does. And you look at that and you're like, oh, that's really interesting how he made that blue background, or the blur, pop blur, or ripples of water, or shadows, or whatever. And you are then inspired to create your own images based on that, right? Here, he's created this image of this monster that's like, ugh. Maybe you're going to create the image of what the monster is doing that to, like the person that's reacting to, right? Or attacking, or whatever. Or maybe you're going to think about the world in which this type of thing could exist, or how that would affect, or the feeling that you might have if you saw this creature, right? And then this inspires your light to create something that's kind of moody and interesting. And from that, somebody else sees what you did, and they're like, oh, I love how you use the color palette here. I love that you're using like this kind of purpley green light or whatever. Oh, I'm going to use that for this scene over here that's more like a romantic scene, but it's happening in kind of in a sleazy hotel or whatever. I don't know. And you use this light here, and then somebody else sees what you did in that one, and then they're inspired to do something else, and this story just keeps moving forward and carrying. And I think a lot of this is unconscious. So I'm very specifically pointing things out, but honestly, this is kind of what happens. That's a loud truck. This is what we do, right? We as photographers, as visual artists, we see things, right? Everything we see, or this we should, right? Everything that we see should become, and, subconsciously, I'm not saying to like stress your brain out, but every time you look at something and you see how the light falls on it, or how the wind blows through it, or how the colors work together, it becomes something that you can use when you're creating your work, even if it's something small, right? And not related. Like you're looking at something, let's say that you photograph food. I always talk about food photography for some reason. I must be hungry whenever I ever make these. You're a food photographer. That doesn't mean that you should only get inspiration by looking at food photography. In fact, that's probably the last place you should look, so you're not copying people, right? What you should be doing is looking at other things, right? Thinking about the sensations of food or when you might eat certain foods as comfort foods, right? We're getting into the fall now, so maybe like certain people are eating more soups, let's say. I always wondered, well, I guess I lived in the South, so well, yeah, I still ate soup in the fall. So you're eating more soups and like, vegetables, pumpkin spice coffee, that kind of stuff. But basically, there's that, right? Then you have like the fall leaves, right? So you have that mix. Like I'm looking out on my porch. Sorry, you guys are looking at me. And I see that there's a mix of greens and reds and yellows as the leaves are starting to change. And how like now there's like patches where some leaves have fallen, so there's like drops of light coming through that wasn't there a month ago when it was all green and blocked, right? All of these little things that we see that touch our brain are what become the future, the stuff that we create, right? We churn it, and then our own vision creates the thing, right? So we want to be open to as much as possible. We want the best way to, so little side story, always a side story with me. So when I was first out of college, I worked for Reebok. I mentioned this before, the shoe company Reebok, back when they were much bigger than they are now. Well, actually, I don't know how big they are anymore because I don't follow it. But at the time, it was like Nike, and then it was like Reebok right below us. And actually, it was Reebok, and then Reebok, I forget what they called it, Classics. So we were actually the number 2 and number 3 shoe company in the world. Anyways, and I worked developing shoes, right? And one of the things that they used to do was once a month, all the people that were in the art type departments, the development departments, would take the day to do something creative. I mean, some people were, just took that day to do their chores or whatever and didn't actually do what they're supposed to be doing. But the idea was that, okay, this Thursday of this month, we're shut down. No meetings, no nothing, no whatever. Everybody's go to a museum, go for a hike, do the thing that inspires you, cleanse yourself, clean out all the muck. Because when you're looking at this, right, you're looking at very specific things for work, right? It's very fixed. But to be an artist, though, to create, to do something new, you need to be around things, right? You need to have things coming to you. You need to read. You need to see, in different light. You need to travel, all these things. That's where we get it from, right? When I'm about to make a photo, sometimes I think about, let's say, the morning light coming across the ruins that I saw when I was in Turkey years ago. It's like, those things stay in my brain. That color palette, that depth, that the shadows, the crispness of being like in the desert. When I was in the Mojave Desert and we were hiking, and the sun setting, of being in Las Vegas with this stuff, being in New York City, where of course I live now. All these things influence, right, where you are. I mean, I remember being a kid and sleeping on like a little island in a lake where we used to spend the summers in New Hampshire, like waking up to as the sun comes up, and you can just hear the water splashing on this little tiny island, and you're kind of sore because you've been sleeping basically on just a sleeping bag, on rocks, because that's what you could do when you were a kid. Whoosh. And getting up and just basically like walking from my where I was essentially sleeping just into the lake to swim. That moment, that freshness, that snap. And I know that that's not a visual. Well, maybe it is a visual to you as I explain that now. But those memories, those things are what help us to move forward. And that could be something that you experience yourself or another piece of art. And I guess that's where I'm talking here. Seeing something, right? Seeing something and I'm not saying it was half done. In fact, the original story is really good. It was a complete story, but there was a thing, right? There was a thing that opened your eyes. It was like, but what about Carcosa, right? And then boom, and then boom, and then it goes and it grows and it spreads. And ultimately we want to be able to pick up the fire of that inspiration, but also we want to be that inspiration, So feel honored, feel excited when you see people doing the things that you do. If you're doing something, right, and you see other people that pick up that technique and they start running with it, good. Right? That's fantastic. That's what we want. We want people to grow. We want people to intersect. We want them. Maybe they'll take it somewhere that you never did. And maybe the thing that they got from you that became their thing, you could then learn something from to do something else, because that's the way that it is. So hopefully this inspires you. See what I did there? But yeah, I just wanted to talk a little about that. I thought it was an interesting little story, and that's why I went and bought the Vice book, because I want to read more of his stories. I had only ever read the first one. And like I said, it's in public domain. You can just Google it, and you'll find it. But I figured, I'll buy the book and I can read all the stories. He was a Civil War, he was in the Civil War. So this is a pretty old book. They're both kind of old, actually. I mean, they're printed recently, but they're the original older books. Sometimes the things that we want to find or that we get inspired by can be something that comes from wherever, And I think that is actually, well, it's funny. I was about to close. I was about to say subscribe, but I didn't, because I was just thinking, back before, before there was the internet the way it is now, and Google and Amazon and all these people were basically controlling what you think, Facebook. And I say that not in some conspiracy way, but the idea that I was watching YouTube videos last night, so about something, and when I woke up this morning, I got a bunch of YouTube videos that were similar. And of course, that's great, right? Because it's oh, we're interested in this topic, and more stuff comes up. But if you didn't have that, and you walked into a room that was full of books, and you just picked one at random every time, perhaps that would be a little bit more inspirational, because you'd pick something that you would have never thought that you'd like. It's kind of like when we used to travel, years ago, before there was I'm talking when I was a kid. Before radio stations became very, consolidated, wherever you went, there would be radio stations that were unique. There wasn't wow, there's a lot of birds flying by right now. There wasn't Kiss, blah, blah, blah. Everywhere you went, they played the same music. You would go to certain parts of the country. I used to travel around a lot, and they would play different music, and you'd hear things that you didn't hear. I grew up in Boston area. They'd be playing, Boston, but they'd be playing that kind of music. That would, classic rock, kind of what they call classic rock today, is kind of very popular. But you'd go to the South, and they'd be playing, let's say, country music, right? And this is not really the case anymore, right? Because we are fed what we know we like, so we only ever kind of get that, right? And that's both good and bad. So, I went kind of that could have been a whole other video right there, but I just think it's super interesting to think about how to break the tangent, to see something in what we're looking at, and instead of looking at more of that, to say, but what about this thing over here, and then go in that direction. Break it off and go over here, and find something new. Because find something new in that thing that's already there, and use that as your place to step off and create what is yours, what is your style. Because what you pick from it, I get style questions all the time. The part of your style is basically what you see in that thing, right? If we all look at the same picture and we all say a different thing, that's our style, right? What I see here is one thing, what you see there is another. And that's what makes the images in our art and our vision unique and different, is that we do see different things. I don't mean like a Rorschach or whatever. I'm talking about generally, I might look at the light and go, oh, I like the way the light is over here. You might be like, oh, I like the way the color. Oh, I like the composition. We all take different things. In any case, if you haven't already, guys, go ahead and subscribe, and I will see you next time.